Welcome to our webinar today on innovative finance for incentivizing impact and advancing financial inclusion. And for anyone that celebrates, want to wish you a happy Halloween, and glad that you were able to join us for this discussion. I am really excited about it. We have a really great lineup of speakers and panelists, and I'm excited to hear about all of the different models that are out there. So I am going to first of all introduce myself, and then I will give a quick overview of Financial Inclusion Week, which is happening this week, and also talk about the structure of our webinar this morning, and then we'll do introductions and get started. So my name is Danielle Piscadlo, and I work at the Center for Financial Inclusion at Accion as part of the Investing in Inclusive Finance program area. So we think about different financing structures for the financial inclusion industry a lot, and decided to pull this panel together because we have been talking to a lot of the different panelists and felt like there were all these really interesting and cool structures that were happening in different sectors, and wanted to bring that broader conversation into financial inclusion and talk about how that might be able to help us in advancing our mission. So next slide, please. I'm gonna just talk through the Financial Inclusion Week, and I don't think I control the slides, is that right? There we go. Okay, so great. So Financial Inclusion Week is happening this week. It's a very exciting event where we create a platform. This is our 4th year of hosting it at the center. We have over 80 partners throughout the world and 50+ events, I just heard. So I guess there's some that are still taking place throughout the rest of the week. And we have a hashtag also that you will see on this slide, hashtag Inclusion Week. So please feel free to tweet during this or share on social media during this webinar if anything that we say sort of strikes you and you want to share it with your networks. So that is Financial Inclusion Week. And then the structure for this session is going to be, we have an hour here, and I'm gonna let the presenters all introduce themselves briefly. And then in the order that they introduce themselves, each one of them is going to have a few minutes to share with us about their model and how it works. And then we'll take a couple questions after each, in between each transition. And then at the end, we'll leave plenty of time, I promise, for general discussion, for people to chime in and share more about their work or questions that they may have. So we have a couple guided questions, but really hoping this can be interactive. I do want to mention that we have a chat box also on GoToWebinar, so you should see that over, in kind of your control panel, and feel free to chat comments or questions at us, and we will try to address those. So without further ado, I am going to then turn it over to Rashmi, and if someone could change just to the next slide so we can see the presenters' names. Yeah, great. If you wouldn't mind kicking us off with introductions.
Absolutely. So this is Rashmi Khare. I'm a director on the social investments team at Social Finance. I have an intro slide in my presentation, but I'll just say I'm very excited to be part of the conversation that Accion is leading today on financial inclusion, and I'll be speaking about income share agreements in a couple of minutes.
Hi, Rory Tews here from Roots of Impact. I've been working on what we call the social impact incentives, or SIINC model, for about 3 years now. It's like a blended finance instrument. That's what I'll be talking about, and its application in a couple of different sectors and how it could potentially be adapted or useful for the purposes of financial inclusion.
And hi, I'm not sure, for Kristy, did you figure out your audio?
Yeah.
Ah, great, welcome.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm Kristy Henrich from Pacific Community Ventures Research and Consulting team. We do a number of research and consulting projects for the broader impact investing field, and then also field building research. And I'll be talking about our Good Jobs, Good Business Toolkit today.
Hi, everyone. This is Anna Kanze. I'm Chief Operating Officer for Grassroots Capital Management, which is an asset manager that invests, among other sectors, in financial inclusion. And Grassroots has been working with the Center for Financial Inclusion at Axion for several years on trying to develop an instrument that aligns incentives with social values in the financial inclusion sector. And I'm excited to share that with you all.
Hi, everyone. This is Natasha Garcha from Impact Investment Exchange. I'm the Associate Director of the Capital Markets team, focusing mostly on blended finance, gender lens investing, and impact assessment. Very excited to be here today and share with you more about our Women's Livelihood flagship product, which was, I believe, one of the first impact investment instruments in the world listed on the stock exchange. So excited to share more and to hear more from everybody else. The panel looks incredible.
Yeah, great. And I already introduced myself, so we can skip that, but I just want to give a really special shout out to both Kristy and Natasha. It's 6 a.m. right now for Kristy and 9 p.m. for Natasha. And so just a huge effort made on both of their parts to be here both very early and very late. And so so thank you to both of you. So we're going to get started then and go through the presentation, the slides, our compilation of all the slides that were sent to me from each of these presenters. So it's a bit of a mashup, but we're going to start with social finance then, and we'll go in this order.
Great. Thank you, Danielle. We can actually move to the next slide. Great. So, and I should also say that I think, as Danielle said, it's a mashup of slides from a bunch of different organizations. So you can imagine PowerPoint can get a little bit confused when they've got a bunch of master templates, but I'm happy to send through kind of the clean version of the slides if anybody is interested afterwards. Social Finance is a 501c3 nonprofit whose mission is to mobilize capital to drive social progress. We were founded in 2011 and are part of a larger global network that includes the UK, US, Israel, India, and most recently the Netherlands joined our global network. We have over 40 individuals in offices in Boston, Austin, and San Francisco. And along the bottom there, you see some of the issue areas that we work in. If we can flip to the next slide. The primary way that we meet our mission to mobilize capital to drive social progress has been through Pay for Success. Pay for Success is about measurably improving the lives of people most in need by driving government resources towards more effective programs. So in the schematic that is up on the slide, private funders or impact investors are providing expansion capital to nonprofit intervention providers. As those intervention providers deliver services to a specific target population, outcomes are measured and achieved. As those outcomes are measured and achieved, a payer, most often a government, is repaying those private funders for that expansion capital with some small return on that investment. And so this is the basic framework to keep in mind as I talk about income share agreements and how we're really excited to think about income share agreements is not only a very powerful incentive alignment tool, but also a financial inclusion tool. If we could move to the next slide. So we have been working on developing Pay for Success strategies to advance workforce outcomes. So I'm sure this group is aware of as well that in the United States, there is a large and growing number of unfilled middle skill jobs. And when I say middle skilled, I mean jobs that require more than a high school degree, but not necessarily a bachelor's degree. And there's different definitions inside of there, but in essence, that's the range of education that we're talking about. There are limited resources to scale effective training programs to help get people ready for those middle skill jobs. And even if those programs were available, there are financial barriers to accessing this type of high quality training. So we've been thinking about how to use our past 7 years of experience of Pay for Success, social impact bonds, thinking about those principles of aligning those types of project partners towards meaningful outcomes and thinking about how to use that to address the widening skills gap. So what our goal here in this type of initiative is a resilient and diverse labor force to meet the needs of the 21st century American economy. For my remarks today, I'll be focused on that kind of right-hand square, the income share agreement, where individuals are paying for career success. can move to the next slide. So at its very core, an income share agreement shares a lot in common with pay for success. In an income share agreement, students, rather than a government, are responsible for making payments if meaningful employment outcomes are achieved. And also just to level set in case an income share agreement isn't that familiar to everybody in the audience, an income share agreement is a funding tool whereby the person who takes out the ISA, the student, is only making payments if their income meets a certain threshold, and they're paying a certain percentage of that income over a defined period of time. So for example, if their income exceeds $50,000, they're paying 5% of their income, every year, as long as that income is above 50K for 4 years. So you can see there's both downside and upside protection for the student. I'm happy to talk more about that later on. But in terms of the schematic that we have here, the way we would be bringing kind of our orientation to pay for success to this world is you have impact investors who are investing to basically provide the funding necessary to issue an income share agreement. The service provider is delivering services to students. Those students are graduating and gaining employment, so they're transitioning from students to workers. And then as those workers are now gainfully employed, they're repaying a portion of their earnings through the income share agreement back to the impact investors. If we go to the next slide. As I mentioned at the very beginning, social finance is a nonprofit. We're a mission-oriented organization. And so we are going to take a student-friendly or an impact-first approach to this type of income share agreement. And so what we've listed out here are a handful of the types of guiding principles that we're using to inform our work. I'm not going to read each of these, but it's more just to let the group know that this is very core to our work, and we would want project partners to be aligned with us on these guiding principles to make sure that we continue to do work that keeps the student front and center and keeps their experience in mind. And next slide, please. And lastly, because I know this is an action-oriented group, just wanted to give some illustrative conditions in which an income share agreement may be a good fit for a program. So first, if there's available data that supports an understanding of what a meaningful employment outcome is. So once graduation happens, what kind of track record does that program have in providing the next bullet point, which is valuable and sustainable skills within an in-demand industry? So those are very kind of on-the-ground types of things. Are you delivering an educational or training program that makes sense in that particular place-based area? There's also an idea of, are you meeting an unmet need for services along with the financial constraint, as well as addressing financial constraints that are a barrier to entry for those potential participants? And lastly, wanting to make sure that the costs and the duration justify the means. And again, this is lining up with the idea of positive incentives. I think this group is probably aware of some of the negative press around, like, for example, for-profit educational providers and how are students being saddled with student debt and not being able to attain meaningful employment. And so that's also very core to our understanding of when an ISA can be a positive fit for a program. And so that's my kind of quick overview of an income share agreement. I think, Danielle, we wanted to take a few questions before moving to the next panelist.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Thank you for sharing that. It sounds like, you're kind of working at this intersection that we're hearing a lot about of, the future of work and how that's kind of changing and evolving. And then also, as you mentioned, kind of the student loan crisis that our country is facing in the US here and other parts of the world. So are there questions from the audience? I don't know exactly how they would ask a question. They can either use the chat box or raise their hand and we unmute them. Is that right? Okay, so
go ahead, Danielle.
I was wondering if you could to the kind of types, give us maybe an example of the types of partners that you would be working with for the, that you mentioned in that model of what types of partners would you be working with to?
Yeah, absolutely.
Help the students with that transition.
Yep. So one example of it, I'll just say as an industry without naming specific partners, but an industry that has really taken to an income share agreement is coding boot camps. So organizations that provide really intensive, kind of anywhere from like 6 to 12 weeks worth of training to get people upskilled in technology, whether or not it's like how do you develop a web app or things of that nature, providing really tactical skills. If you look, basically like every month for the last 6 months, there's been another announcement of a major investment to allow that coding bootcamp to offer ISAs. I think what distinguishes the work we are doing in that space is that kind of set of core principles, guiding principles in terms of how are we making sure that we're providing a kind of meaningful experience to the student and an appropriate financing tool to them that allows them to kind of take full advantage of high quality training but not, taking 25% of their income coming off of it to repay it.
Yeah, absolutely. And we did actually just have a question come in from Chaham. I hope I'm saying that right. How is the ISA better than a social impact bond, which is paid, then in parentheses, paid back by government? So I don't know if better or
yeah, happy. Yeah, I think it's an interesting question. I don't necessarily think. So I should back up and say there isn't any reason why, from a policy standpoint, government couldn't be doing a lot of this work themselves. There are definitely policy levers that can be used to support the ultimate goals of the ISA. And the federal government actually does have kind of a cure instrument for people who are failing on their student loans to divert it or change it to something that's income based as opposed to like the straight loan. So there's definitely a world in which a government is paying back for the positive outcomes. There's definitely value that is being accrued at the government level for this type of workforce development. So kind of, Danielle, what you were just alluding to, better is an interesting term there. I don't think it's mutually exclusive that the government couldn't be doing this. I think right now we're seeing, in a way, a market failure for the government to be stepping in to do this. And so I think social finance sees a role for it to play to make sure that there are student-centric, impact-first ISAs that are being put out and available to students. I appreciate your question.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, keep the questions coming. Okay, so in the interest of time, then I am going to turn it over to Rory to talk to us about Roots of Impact SIINC model. So next slide, please. Yeah, there we go.
Thank you very much. I'll just provide a little bit of background on Roots of Impact to begin with. We're based in Germany, focused on market building around the nexus of impact investing, development and philanthropic work, and social entrepreneurship. So particularly looking at the areas of kind of blended finance, but also doing kind of educational work, piloting new funding mechanisms, new approaches. We have a very simple motto: whatever it takes. So we just see what the situation is and try to develop customized solutions for that. And one of the things that we've been working on for quite a while, and myself in particular, has been the social impact incentives model, the SIINC model, which is an outcomes-based mechanism, which we designed specifically for kind of the social or impact-oriented businesses. So technically for-profit enterprises who have an impact orientation. The model is based around a bilateral contract, so just one single contract between the outcome payer and the impact enterprise, which sets out a set of outcome performance based payments that will be paid to the enterprise should they fulfill their contract. So in essence, it's a kind of a pre-order. The outcome payer essentially puts a pre-order to the enterprise and says, okay, guys, I want you to deliver 200 units of outcome X and 600 units of outcome Y, please. And there's two scenarios which then emerge. In scenario 1, as we call it, the impact enterprise doesn't yet have investor interest and can plug this pre-order from the outcome pair into its financials in order to improve its investability, thereby catalyzing a round of investment into the enterprise. That's the first scenario that we work with. The second scenario that we work with is that the enterprise is already usually a bit further advanced, and the investability is stronger. The commercial model is already better developed, and there is already investor interest. And what we look at then is, okay, how can we leverage the funds that are going to be invested into this enterprise to optimize its impact? How can we deepen the impact of these into enterprises? So this is the basic model. As I say, a bilateral contract between the outcome pair and the impact enterprise. The relation between the impact enterprise and the investor is left open. There can be, it's no predefined investor. It needs to be hard investment, so repayable. But in terms of what form it can take, equity, debt, mezzanine, we could also look at income sharing agreements, revenue sharing agreements, these kind of things would all be on the table. And I'll just go through two very brief examples. If we skip to the next slide. So we've structured a number of deals. One of them was with an organization called Clínicas del Azúcar, who provide a one-stop shop solution in Mexico for people with diabetes. So at the moment, if you have diabetes in Mexico or in most other places, actually, and you have kind of two options. We have three options. One option is to go through the public system, where you spend a lot of time running around to different clinics, to different doctors, trying to get the test done, trying to get things move forward in order to get your diabetes under control. The other option is you go to a private clinic where everything is there, and you get all the tests done, you get all the support you require under one roof, but it's generally pretty expensive. And the third option is you say, well, whatever, and you kind of go blind or lose a foot or lots of other not very nice things that happen. So Clínicas del Azúcar said, okay, we need to solve this problem. And they've basically, what they say themselves is they come up with a McDonald's for diabetes. The irony isn't lost on themselves. But we looked at their model and we said, okay, they're doing great work in terms of the mix of people that are going to their clinics. So they have people from all income groups going to their clinics because they, have a pricing scheme which enables that. And what we said is, guys, we'll incentivize you to do more. So we set out an incentive structure whereby we incentivize them. If you look on the right-hand side, the number 2, to make sure that the effectiveness of the treatment for BOP clients maintained its level or improved. And on the left-hand side, the number 1 metric was to increase the ratio of BOP clients in their overall mix. And they had a vision of what they required in order to achieve profitability. We incentivized them in 2 ways. One was to set up a custom clinic, a BOP clinic, where it has been shown that their original thinking was that they could manage about 31% BOP clientele in order to maintain profitability. In this BOP clinic, they're running at 57% with no major difference in the commercial viability. And the overall BOP clientele percentage of the organization has risen from 31 to 36% since we began just over a year, 18 months ago. So there has been pretty good results up to now in terms of nudging the business to address the BOP market segment in a more focused manner. And this is something that could roll over into the financial inclusion area. And looking at the second example that I wanted to show you guys on the next slide, is SIINCing Root Capital. So Root Capital is an organization which provides SME finance in the agricultural sector. They provide loans, if you look on the right-hand side of this little graph, to big businesses and also to mid to large type businesses, where that part of their loan portfolio covers their costs. If you look at the left-hand side, you'll see there part of the loan portfolio where the loans no longer the cost of servicing that market segment. So loans in the 100 to 500,000 range, and in specific markets. And what we've done is we have developed an incentivization structure where we say, okay, based on the additionality of the loans that Root Capital provide, if they're high additionality loans, then we provide them with a payment, an incentive to provide those loans to the organizations in question. And based on that, they can then judge, okay, how many of these loans can we take into our portfolio? So the idea is through our structure, there will be about 40 loans given to these kind of agricultural SMEs, which leads to larger increases in earnings among smallholder farmers that are engaged with the portfolio companies in question. Again, it's getting in direction of financial inclusion, so that's why I took it. Danielle is even smiling, so I mustn't have been too far off the mark.
No, that's great. Thank you so much for those examples. I think that really helps. I guess if there are any questions, feel free to put them in the chat box or raise your hand, and we can take one or two quickly before we move on this SIINC model specifically. But I am wondering if you could talk though then about if there are any sectors that you feel that the SIINC model is sort of more appropriate for than others? Is there a reason why you started with these sectors specifically, or?
No, I mean the pilot was sector open, like sector agnostic. We were based in the Latin American region for mandate reasons. I don't think that the SIINC model in and of itself has that there's any sectors that would be any better or worse in terms of its application. You will see, I mean, it's outcomes based, so sectors where the outcomes are somehow clearer in terms of being able to define them, like education. You can check educational progress pretty easily. But we're looking at things like sanitation. What you will see is that the relation between the amounts of outcome payments to projected investment differs greatly by sector. So if you're looking at sectors like wash, like sanitation, the good that comes out of this is largely a public good. So the amount of outcome funds that are required in order to catalyze a given amount of private investment differs greatly from a sector, let's say like off-grid clean energy, where there is a large commercial market out there, which is at the moment, let's say, underserved, but huge, and where, people would be willing and able to pay a given amount to be able to purchase products. And in that case, you're talking about much lower amounts or ratios of required outcome funds to catalyze a given level of commercial and investment activity. That's the one thing I would say,
Yeah, that's helpful. And then we did get a question from a participant. Christina asked, "What's the end game when the incentivization mechanism runs out?"
So we kind of have two, what we refer to as exit strategies or exit scenarios. One is the public exit, whereby if we take the sanitation example, you'd be looking at something like the sanitation department of a country taking on the contracts or providing contracts then for the organization that have been receiving SIINC payments up to a certain point, so that they continue to provide these services. The other possible exit is the market-based exit, where you're talking about the enterprise having reached a level of scale that they can service the market profitably without the need for further incentivization. So market-based or public exit. Yeah.
Yeah. And another question came in, but from Natasha, but it's actually a general question that I think would be good to have everyone sort of answer at the end around who are the best kind of outcome funders. So I'm going to ask if we can move on then to the next slides and turn it over to Kristy, so that we make sure we get through all of these great models. Can you, is your audio still working, Kristy? Yeah?
Yeah.
All right, great.
Okay, wonderful. So I'm going to speak this morning about Pacific Community Venture PCV's approach to defining, measuring, incentivizing, and building the capacity of small businesses to create good jobs. You can move ahead to the next slide. Next slide. Great. So first, just a brief overview of PCV. So we're a community development finance institution with 3 integrated arms that work together to strengthen small businesses and their communities, particularly for our quality jobs work. So we have small business lending in California. We have a national business advising platform. And then we have an impact investing research and consulting team, which was the team that developed our Good Jobs, Good Business Toolkit, which I'll be walking through in more detail today. Can move on to the next slide, please. Great. So how does PCV define a quality job, and how do we go about this process of figuring out what a quality job was for small businesses? So we actually went out and we talked to small business owners and their employees, and then we conducted desk research in the literature to understand how a quality job might be defined for small businesses. And we settled on this working framework that you can see here, which is that a quality job includes a living wage, basic benefits, career building opportunities, wealth building opportunities, and a fair and engaging workplace. And for us, a quality job just needs to include 3 of the following 5 key elements. Next slide, please. Great. So we wanted to make these learnings practical for the small business owners. And this was really the main piece of feedback that started coming through as we were conducting our research and interviewing them. So we took these learnings and we built a practical toolkit. And in that toolkit, we really worked to embed the business case to show small business owners that providing good jobs is not only good for their employees, but also good for their bottom line. Next slide. Great. So what does this toolkit contain? The toolkit is structured around the key themes of those areas of job quality that we identified through the research. So we heard that small business owners wanted concrete guidance on, and then we asked them what would actually be helpful to you. So we worked to find how-to guides and actually write them ourselves, and then looked for case studies of other small businesses that had gone out and actually done this work of implementing, higher employee compensation, going about creating retirement benefit programs, scheduling vacation and paid leave, and then also finding tools and benchmarks for small business owners out there in the field. And throughout the toolkit, all of these are connecting them to existing and free resources that they can find. I actually want to show you a page of the toolkit. So if you want to move ahead to the next slide. So as you can see here, and it might be a little bit small, this is the first page of the hiring, training, and professional development section. So each section of the toolkit gets started with the business case, as I mentioned, for the small business owner. So we know that small business owners and their employees can really just get distracted by the day-to-day problems that they really just need to tackle that day. And we really want to show them how providing a good job is actually something that can then help strengthen their business. So we walk them through that first. And then below, we have individual questions that break down this massive challenge of hiring, training, and professional development into its sub-problems that they can get started with, or the sub-challenges. How do I get started? What if I need to fire an employee? Or how do I hire the best people for the business? And then each individual subsection contains those how-to guides, the case studies that the business owner can be linked to, and external benchmarks. Next slide, please. So lastly, we're currently in the middle of running a pilot asking our participants, small business owners who are paired with an advisor, for specific feedback on the toolkit so we can roll it out nationwide in 2019. Right now, more broadly, we're using it within our own loan fund. And by working with an advisor to help the business understand the business case for why providing good jobs is also good for their employees. One of our participants here that you can see, Batter Bakery, Jen, the business owner, and her advisor really wanted to help improve her sluggish retail sales. So her and her advisor were working through, how might she be able to do this? And she really communicated to her advisor that she's really excited every single day about the ingredients that she uses in her baked goods. Own employee. Her advisor was able to help her understand that by implementing a stronger employee engagement and also a professional development and training program, and actually showing them how that these might be transferable skills that they can bring forward in their work, she might be able to help them see that the work that they do there at Batter Bakery can be something that they bring forward both, sort of in their daily life there and then in their career beyond. And so they're in the middle of implementing a broader employee engagement and training program, and we'll see what happens with that.
Great, thank you. So just to sort of tie this in then to the theme of sort of outcome payments. So when we're talking to your colleagues about this model, so the idea is though that if these, so this is a really helpful and comprehensive toolkit, and I love that you've put it together. And so then the idea is if this toolkit is used in job quality, then community go ahead. Do you want to explain how then they get incentivized for improving?
Yeah, definitely. So when we're underwriting a business, we'll inform them of our commitment to job quality and actually give them the toolkit. And then we offer incentives of up to $4,250 for the businesses that actually will improve an element of job quality. And so this is something that we're really committed to working with them on. And we'll actually pair them with that dedicated advisor sort of throughout the course of this pilot and utilization of the toolkit.
That's great. I love that the incentive is provided, but along with the tools and resources and how to get there. I think that that's a really important component of this, not just sort of saying, here's the end game and you have to figure out yourself how to get there. So, so that's great. Are there any questions on this model? Or I want to come back to Natasha's question at the end. So I just want to make it clear that I didn't ignore that, but I want everyone to sort of address then who the outcome funders are so that that's clear. But I think just in the interest of time, since we have 2 more models we want to get through, if we could turn it over to Anna, who is joining us from Foromique today. So thank you for the extra effort for joining remotely. If you could walk us through Aligning for Impact.
Great. Thanks, Danielle, and apologies for any background noise. Like Danielle said, I'm kind of in a conference hall right now, which seems to be filling up a little bit. So hopefully you can all hear me. So as I mentioned in the introduction, Grassroots and CFI have been sort of brainstorming for a few years now on how to develop an instrument that aligns incentives with social values for the financial inclusion industry. And it's been very encouraging to see so much progress from these examples that we're hearing from today. Next slide, please. So over the past couple of decades, financial service providers have expanded access to financial services for low-income people, while also creating benefits for customers, including greater convenience, improved financial capability, asset building, and more. And with technological advances, the outreach has deepened further. But the digital revolution also has new challenges with it, including the potential to move away from the very target markets that need services the most. And also, another effect of this might be that investors are looking to other sectors that are doing a better job of measuring and highlighting the positive impact of their investments, which has a negative impact on the growth of the financial inclusion sector and expanding access for underserved clients. Next slide, please. So there still is a great opportunity. The gap still exists and it continues as far as access to services. And this is most felt in rural, remote areas, and especially for female clients. Next slide, please. To make sure the financial inclusion sector continues to provide solutions to identify needs and continues to innovate and expand the current range of services and providers to meet unmet demands, the sector needs a framework that monetarily incentivizes those financial service providers with demonstrated commitment to their social missions. And we could learn a lot from the models that we've heard from today. Next slide, please. There are many institutions committed to reaching underserved and marginalized populations with support from debt investments and clearly identified objectives. The framework that we're thinking of would reward those institutions based on their performance. And this could be measured in a number of ways. The financial inclusion sector already has many innovations in the area of identification of indicators, data collection, output and outcomes measurement, et cetera. So this framework would build on those industry tools and technology and monetarily incentivize the institutions based on demonstrated outcomes. Next slide. So this model is similar to what has been described with SIINC and the ISAs, in that there would be an investment pool and an intermediary that would facilitate the investment into financial service providers, and then also independently verify the social outcomes and then provide incentive payments to the providers based on their performance. The incentives would be funded by a separate donation pool in which investors could also choose to donate if they wanted to. Next slide, please. So applying this framework to the financial inclusion space would help drive greater measurement, reporting, and accountability on social performance to the sector, and hopefully engage new socially minded investors and channel much needed capital to institutions providing financial services for the harder to reach clients, and help achieve the sustainable development goals that are important to us all. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Anna. That's a great overview. And this came up on a webinar that I led yesterday also, the idea that, I think one of the core themes that runs through all these models that I'll just mention quickly before we move on, and please let us know if you have any questions about this specific model that I've also been working with Anna on, but is the idea of being able to explicitly price out the impact that's being achieved and being able to use that information and that data to make better decisions. So Rory, I know when you were talking about the SIINC model, like that came out as well when you're talking about Root Capital, that there's sort of this whole section of their portfolio that is loss making, but when you're able to kind of factor in the high additionality and the value of the loans that they're making, like that changes the equation, it changes the decision making. So I think that's sort of part of what we're putting in here. This idea is being able to, for impact investors who are increasingly interested in investing with their values, giving them an opportunity to make those decisions and be able to understand what the value of that impact is. So happy to answer any questions on this model that we continue to kind of incubate. But if there aren't any coming through at this point, then I would be excited to turn it over to Natasha as well. And Natasha and I just were at SOCAP together, and so I've already heard part of this this presentation, and I'm excited to share more of it with all of you. So Natasha, how is your audio? Are you able to?
Yeah, no, you let me know how my audio.
You're good. You're coming through clear.
All right, great. SOCAP was a crazy week, and you know, it's very inspiring to see so many people talking about many of the things that we focus on as well. But IX has really, you know, been around for the last decade. I think many of us actually worked on Wall Street when the financial crisis hit, and I think that's when the term impact investing was coined, and IX itself as an organization got started to build a sort of parallel social capital markets, if you will, in response to that, very much so. And what we do is really use our work to connect the Wall Streets of the world with the back streets of the world. And we have a big focus on ensuring that we use finance as a tool for progress to promote inclusive peace. Within that, there are three large buckets that we focus on as an organization. The first being women empowerment, the second climate action, and the third community resilience, really focusing on disadvantaged communities. But if you move to the next slide, we'll show you just an overview of on the map how we started as an organization headquartered out of Singapore, given that a majority of the work was initially in South and Southeast Asia, to now an organization that's got quite a global footprint everywhere from Fiji to the United States. But what's been really interesting for us is to really take a step back and say, as a women-led organization, how do we use finance as a tool to ensure that women aren't viewed as victims, but they're recognized as solutions to many of sustainable development issues today? How do we use finance to break down the silos between public, private, and philanthropic sectors and align incentives, which many of the other panelists have shared really incredible models. So excited to be on this panel with them of how they do it, and I'll do it more through my discussion. And then last but not least, how do we ensure that we're addressing the sustainable development goals, which have a funding gap of about 2.5 trillion per year, when the capital markets have about 85 trillion per year? How do we create the right products that tap into those capital markets and effectively pull the private sector, people who are not currently investing in these things, into our world of sustainable development? So if you go to the next slide, it really talks about the big goals that we have for the next 5 years. So over the last I would say over the last decade, we've done a lot of work to mobilize, you know, millions of dollars to do some of this work. We've done over 130 impact assessments. But what does this mean going forward? And I think you may have to click a few times, and I think I wonder if this is an animated slide.
Yeah, there we go. Sorry, I can see there's supposed to be something on these slides.
Our 5-year goals were blank for a second there, but that's fine. So the first is really to mobilize $1 billion through innovative finance. The second is to use this to impact 100 million women globally. And the last is to drive forward the sustainable development goals for gender, peace, and partnership. So that's, I believe, goal 5, 16, and 17. So we worked on this big project with the UN last year, so they're sort of drilled into my head. I probably say them in my sleep. But if you go to the next slide, I'll talk about our flagship product, which in many ways does a lot of these things, which is the Women's Livelihood Bond. Now, in 700 years of capital markets, we've never had an instrument that puts women front and center, really listed on any stock exchange. So this was the first. So we're very excited about it as an organization, and have got an incredible set of partners that helped us to make this happen. I always say that impact investing can't really be done in a vacuum, and inclusive finance, you know, which is really, I believe the whole impact investment movement was built on the shoulders of, you know, microfinance and financial inclusion, really owes to the fact that if you can work effectively with partners, you can move capital more effectively as well. So to do this bond, we actually had upfront support from the Rockefeller Foundation to get us started to structure the bond. We had a bond which pooled together a group of social enterprises and microfinance institutions focused on women's livelihoods. Since we aggregated a pool instead of doing individual loans, we were able to play very creatively with the risk, return, and impact profile of the overall product. We were able to aggregate it to a certain scale it would be attractive for private sector investors to come in, getting a 5.65% coupon over 4 years. We brought USAID, which is the donor arm of the US government, in to provide a 50% guarantee. The guarantee was subsidized by the Australian government's DFAT. So we literally had people from across the world coming to de-risk the instrument. So you had the public sector doing what they do best, which is credit enhancement, not acting as investors. The investors were all completely private sector. And we could do this because we had two of the largest banks in the region, DBS and Australia New Zealand, or ANZ Bank, sell the bond to pure private sector investors, high net worths, family offices, and financial institutions. So for the first time, you had a bond listed on the stock exchange that impacted women. Over the 4 years of the bond's life, it's talking about the impact on the women as much as it's talking about the financial performance. So we actually have quarterly reports, all publicly available. And I believe it's also listed on Bloomberg, so you can go and find it there, which I think is a big testament to the generalized investing movement as a whole and the growth of the space. But if you move to the next slide, I'll talk about a very important part of this bond. So since it's a replicable security, we're now doing a $100 million issuance in Asia Pacific, focused again on women's livelihoods. The first bond impacted 385,000 women, but really, I would say, I'd like to caveat that this is not a social impact bond. It's not a pay-for-performance mechanism. It is an actual bond in the traditional sense of the word. As defined by the International Capital Markets Association, it is a sustainability bond, which means the proceeds are used for to drive forward the sustainable development goals, in short. Now, this means how it comes to the question of how do we ensure that the impact on the women is created. And I think one of the really interesting things about the bond is that before any entity was allowed to be a part of the portfolio, they went through not just a financial due diligence, but also a very rigorous social due diligence in which we spoke directly to the women. And I think this is a very important thing. If you take nothing away from today, please take this away. It's not possible to design a solution when you're not talking to the people it's supposed to serve. So the fact that we had the conversations with the women allowed us to decide how the funds should be used, which entities we should support, and how we should either lower or increase the returns that we were getting from that institution in commensurate to add value to the impact. Now, over the last 10 years, we've done over 130 impact assessments. And what we're doing now for the next Women's Livelihood Bond is actually digitizing this impact assessment. And the whole premise of doing this is to ensure that we can be democratizing the way data is collected, the way it's analyzed, and the way it's verified, so that we're not just giving women a value, but we're also giving them a voice. Would be happy to talk more about any of these things, but I think in the interest of time, I will pause there.
I know, sorry, I grossly underestimated how much there would be to unpack in all of these different models. But this, this webinar for me was really about sharing the models and showing everything that's being done out there and all this amazing work around, structuring these types of agreements. I think that is often underestimated, how much time and work and effort. And I know you mentioned at the SOCOP event, there were like thousands of hours of lawyers that worked pro bono on structuring this. And I know social finance, when I've heard them speak, have also mentioned kind of how difficult it is to be that intermediary and to really bring all of these parties together contractually in a way that works. And so I'm, I think that's sort of this common theme among all of the models, and then being able to really understand what are the outcomes and that we're trying to achieve, and the Pacific Community Ventures has done an amazing job of, a really challenging thing to define, a very nebulous, what is a quality job, but you have to sort of be able to put some concrete language around that and define it in order to make these mechanisms work. And same with aligning for impact. I think that we're really working to try to bring back the voice of the client, which I'm glad you made that point, Natasha, that, if you take away one thing, it's that we need to understand the voice of the client. So just a few kind of closing questions. If there are any in the audience, please feel free to bring those up. And but I guess the two things that I want to go back to, one is Natasha's earlier question around who are the best outcome funders. So maybe if we could just do kind of a rapid round here and have any of the panelists sort of jump in with who they think. I mean, I've heard a few partners mentioned throughout. Natasha, you said the Rockefeller, and I think Rory, you mentioned there's some DFIs that you've been working with, but Are there any specific, or if there's any audience members that have ideas on this?
Happy to jump in. This is Natasha from IEX. So just to clarify, since ours was an actual bond, the outcome funders was really the enterprises we were lending to because they were all financially sustainable. And I think that's an important piece because when we looked at impact, we looked at the sustainability of that impact, which means the entities taking on the capital had to be able to use that to grow such that in the next round, they're able to repay it themselves and are therefore inherently independent at driving forward the outcomes. I think that's one of the unique parts of the model. And we're using other stakeholders just to drive that forward and scale it up.
I'll jump in from my side. It's Rory here. In terms of the SIINC model, it's really dependent on, I would say, like sector and or geographic distinctions. You'll have the outcome funder is going to be like a philanthropic or a development type agency. I could also imagine something like crowdfunding type arrangements and micro donations or something like this. But it is primarily, at the moment at least, kind of grant funding which is being used. If we were looking at financial inclusion, you know, we'd probably be looking at using our model somewhere around like the fintech space and how we can find early stage fintech organizations and reorient or ensure that their models are scaling in as inclusive a manner as possible. And then you'll be looking for outcome funders who have an interest in seeing that happen, and it's part of their mandate. And the same thing then across different sectors.
And this is Rashmi from Social Finance. I would say I would take a blue sky approach. There are multiple entities within any ecosystem that are deriving value from these positive outcomes. So those are employers, those are on the ground governments, those are the actual individuals. And so I think one of the things we're doing in terms of pushing the envelope in outcomes-based financing is try to involve as many of those entities as possible. I think in the United States, we're very excited about the CIPRA, or the Results Act, which is the federal government support for pay for success. So federal government will be putting forward $100 million to support outcomes-based financing through pay for success, and those competitions will launch early next year. So that's an example of how there's an opportunity to braid financing at both the federal and then at either a state or local level to more holistically capture the value that comes with these types of positive outcomes.
Oh, sorry, I was on mute. Yeah, thank you all. Okay, so we're just at time, but since we started a couple minutes late, I just want to see if there are any thoughts. So I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that the theme of Financial Inclusion Week, and I should have mentioned this right up front, is getting inclusion right. So what role do we feel that these types of new and innovative financing structures play in helping to advance that? And so this isn't specific necessarily to financial inclusion, although that's, you know, our sector, and we talked a little bit about that, but just inclusion in general. How do we feel that this is helping to sort of bring people into the fold?
Well, I think with the Women's Livelihood Bond, we were excited to see that. I think one of the things we underestimate often is who the investors are, bringing new investors to the table to drive forward the Sustainable Development Goals, and also having local investors and local entrepreneurs be a part of the solution, as opposed to always looking, externally. At least here in Asia Pacific, that's very important to us now, as we have our own wealth. So with the Women's Livelihood Bond, we did have 62% of the investors being from Asia. And of course, all the enterprises were led by Asians entirely, and many of them actually by women, which is important. And I think that's a big part of being inclusive in a different way.
Absolutely. It's a goal for Aligning for Impact too, to try to drive in more of the retail investors, millennials that we hear are inheriting a lot of wealth and are, you know, we're very hopeful that they will want to invest with values. So see that as a big opportunity.
Yeah, I think one of the major points is, oh, sorry, just to note that it was already brought up as we were talking about the bond there. Actually, listening to the people whom we are attempting to help here, in essence, you know, and making sure that the opportunity or the space is there for solutions to develop and to emerge, which really, you know, are in their interests and reflect their values and their vision of what their life can or should be like. You know, that's just something that sometimes gets overlooked.
Yeah, it's a great point. Was there a final comment then? I don't know if that was Kristy or Rashmi or Anna.
Yeah, from PCV's perspective, the last thing I would add is that pairing the innovative financing structure with an actionable toolkit or resources or an advisor, we just seem to be really impactful for us as small business owners have wanted to be able to provide the good jobs, but just haven't even known where to start.
Yeah, it's hugely important. Yeah, so great. We covered a lot today. This has been really, really interesting for me to kind of bring all these different worlds together. And, you know, I've heard a little bit about this and this model and that model, but to really see them all in one place and to understand this is a movement that we're part of. You know, this is, there's a lot of really interesting stuff happening out there. So thank you again to all of our fantastic panelists from across the globe. I love how global Financial Inclusion Week is, from Singapore to San Francisco and Forum Week and everywhere in between, Germany. So thank you all for joining us. And if there are any final questions, you can always reach out to us at the Center for Financial Inclusion. And we're happy to share the slides too, which was mentioned earlier in the presentation, since the formatting did get a little off for this presentation. But I think that's all the time we have. I'm sorry, I had a lot more questions lined up, but we've unfortunately sort of run out of time. But thank you all for joining today, and look forward to continuing this discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Danielle. Thanks everyone
Thank
else
you
too.
all.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.